our speakers onto the stage. Damyanti Biswas is an author, blogger, spiritualist, and animal lover. Her short stories have been published in magazines in the USA, UK, and Asia. She also helps edit the Forge Literary magazine. Her novel, You Beneath Your Skin, is a crime thriller layered with issues of poverty, misogyny, and corruption. Damyanti supports Project Y, a program that provides quality education to underprivileged children in New Delhi. Rituparna Roy is an assistant professor of English at the Heritage College, Kolkata. An alumna of Presidency College in Calcutta University, she has taught at several institutions in Kolkata, Leiden, and The Hague. She is the author of South Asian partition fiction in English, from Khushwant Singh to Amitav Ghosh, and co-editor of the ICAS volume Writing India Anew, Indian English Fiction 2000 to 2010. Ms. Roy has also written features and reviews for The Wire, Scroll, The Punch, Jaggery, and Kani. Goriahat Junction is her first work of fiction, written mostly during her years in the Netherlands. She's the initiator of the Kolkata Partition Museum project and the managing trustee of KPM Trust that aims at the establishment of a partition museum in Calcutta. Rajorshi Chakraborti has published 6 novels and a collection of short fiction. He was born in Kolkata and grew up there and in Mumbai and now lives with his family in Wellington, New Zealand. 2 of his earlier novels have been nominated in different categories of the Crossword Book Award. Rajorshi's new novel, Shakti, a supernatural mystery thriller set in Kolkata and Delhi, was published by Penguin Random House in November. Let's welcome our panelists up on the stage with a huge round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. It takes 3 brave women and 1 more brave woman to take on the might of Shashi Tharoor in another venue. But we've co-opted you. You're now Rajashri, not Rajorshi. So welcome, everyone. And this session is called She and Her City. Growing up, if someone said she and her city, I wouldn't immediately have images of darkness, of misogyny, of danger, and of women being at a disadvantaged position springing to my mind. Today, sadly, when we say she and her city, these are the images that come into mind. And these 3 authors, in various ways, with different cities in mind, 2 deal with Kolkata, 1 largely with Delhi, bring into focus through 3 very different novels. I mean, they're on one platform, but the novels are very different. They speak about the challenges that face women, some challenges that are age-old, and some which strangely have come alongside the emancipation of women and their claiming their spaces at workplaces and at positions of responsibility. So, since the novels are very different, I thought it would be best to first start with each of you speaking about your different novels and then finding points of commonality later in the conversation. I'd like to start with you, Damyanti. So, your book has very strong women, and yet women who always seem to be in some kind of trouble or danger which they need to overcome. And that is due to forces which they sometimes can't understand and forces that are closer to home. As a mother of a 17-year-old, 17-year-old boy, your novel really scared me. So where did these stories come to you from?
Actually, I am not sure where all my stories come from. That's the honest answer, but I'm supposed to answer the question, so I'll answer it. I think this story came to me via Anjali. Anjali was a perfectionist and she had an imperfect life, and that was the conflict, I think, that gave rise to the entire novel. And then it was her friend who came in, other women came into the picture, and I think what informed the novel also was the fact that it was written, the second draft was written right after the Nirbhaya tragedy happened in December 2012. So there was a lot of helpless rage that I had within me because I used to walk the same streets in Delhi at the time, and you know, I didn't know where to channel it, and somehow all of that trickled into the novel because because I found that in many cases, women and men in Delhi negotiated two different worlds. It was two different New Delhis that they looked at, and men were unaware of the, the problems that women face. They were even unaware of the gazes that made women uncomfortable. And I think that it was something that I wanted to speak about, or to be more honest, that was something that just came out in the novel. And that's how the women in the novel, that shaped the novel at that time.
The other worrying part, as I mentioned, was the unexpectedness from where, without letting out the story, from where danger can come. So, from the Nirbhaya case, we knew about one of the perpetrators being a juvenile. And what is it, this is a question which we kept grappling with after Nirbhaya, and sadly keeps coming back with every outrage and every act of violence against women, that what do we do to teach our sons not to be violent and misogynistic? I'm not again using the word I should, because I don't want to let your story out.
It's a very, it seems like a very simple question, what should we do? And then there's an answer, but I think the question is very complex because the situation in India is very complex.
Your book is very complex. I'm sorry to be asking questions that
yes.
are complex. You'll have to bear with me when you write
Yes,
such
absolutely.
books.
That's because it reflects the Indian reality, because in many ways India is very different from a lot of other countries in the world. The challenges we have are different because part of India is in the 22nd century and part of it is in the 14th, and then there's a, there's a push and pull between the two. And I think one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to think of a rapist or a murderer as this monster who is the other, who's somewhere outside the society, but really he is not. They are very familiar people. They could be in your family, they could be in your neighborhood, they could be in your society, they could be people you were meeting all the time. So that's why the danger lurks everywhere. That's why the danger lurks everywhere in the novel. And I think one of the things that we can do to address it is, I think, start with the bigotry in our family. Start with, the comments that get passed around us, the jokes that are being told, the way parents are upbringing children. So step in where you think that it is not your business to step in, but step in anyway. Make your voice heard that this is not okay. It is not okay to treat your girl different and your boy different. It is not okay to educate your girl child and not educate your boy child, which happens, more often than we know, because when I work with Project Y, I see they put in all the money to educate their sons, but nothing for the daughters. So we have to, I think, speak up. That is the answer, and hope that a problem that has grown up over centuries, it has continued to build up. We can only solve it over generations. There are no quick fixes, no band-aids. A book like You Beneath Your Skin can give rise to conversations like the one that is taking place now, but it provides no easy answers, simply because we must keep on working at it every day.
Okay. Before I move to Rituparna, the other interesting aspect of your novel was the voice of the mother. So, mother-daughter relationships and how they play out, each one, to misquote Tolstoy, each mother and daughter relationship is happy and unhappy in its own way. So could you talk us through that part where the mother is always, in her head?
Motherhood is a complex topic for me because I'm not a mother, and I'm not a mother by choice, which is kind of...
But you're a daughter.
Yes, and no, but that kind of plays into what I write, because I think motherhood cannot be, it cannot be kind of sanitized in some way and glorified in others. If you're a mother, you're this great woman, you're this nourishing personality, you're this, and you have to be. If you're a mother, it is taken for granted that you love mothering your child. That may not be the case. You may not love mothering your child. Your child may be wanted, may be unwanted. You might figure out later that you didn't want the child after all. And all of these things are kind of sanitized and pushed away under the carpet. And the complexity of a mother-son or a mother-daughter relationship is always, especially in the Indian context, mere paas maa hai. So that kind of is a bit too much, I think. And I'm all about reality and what really happens. And in the story, I just had to be very honest about what happens between a mother and a child. And it's not always roses. Yes, there are some roses, but there's a lot of poo as well, you know, and it smells. And that's what it is. I mean, it is what it is. So my novel is a realistic novel. You Beneath Your Skin does not beat about the bush, because I don't like beating about the bush. So that's where I think my commentary on motherhood comes from, is that, you know, motherhood can and should be a choice. And in the case of Anjali, probably it wasn't. She discovers her son has autism and she still longs for a, you know, perfect son. She herself is an imperfect mother and she doesn't like it. So all of that is, it is how it is, you know. Not all mothers are these, you know, noble figures of, you know, beauty and fortitude and nourishment and undying sacrifice. And, you know, mothers are real people. They just happen to become mothers one day because they're rent apart and they give birth to a child. It's a biological process. And of course, there's a psychological process that, you know, accompanies it. But it's kind of stupid and naive to always glorify it. And I think it does disservice to women and mothers.
Okay. So from that point, there is one story, particularly the concluding one in Rituparna's collection of short stories, Goriahat Junction, which speaks about the Pullin Push, which you've so eloquently described, where a mother, a working mother who has so many challenges with just one son, is seriously contemplating on whether she wants another child, and then her doctor explains that there are various aspects, as you said, to a woman, and being a mother is just one of them. So all your women, I mean, you said, are from different stories and experiences of your life. So what brought this collection together?
Thank you, Malavika. I first want to thank KLM and you for giving me a spot. This was one of my dreams, you know, to be an author and to have a spot in KLM. And I'm extremely honored that I have a role model in front of me in the audience. Kunal Basu, thank you so much for being here. And I'm very, very happy to have my students and colleagues here. So it's a little roundabout answer, the question you asked. This is a collection, Goriahat Junction is a collection of short stories. It's a very slim book, actually, you know, just 9 stories, set in Kolkata, post-liberalized, post-millennial Kolkata, the 90s and the first decade of this century. And they are about women who are at a critical juncture in their lives. They all stand at a crossroads. When I started writing, I had no plan. I had actually no idea what I was doing. To be very honest, I just wanted to be in a creative writing workshop with Amitav Ghosh. That's how it started off. And once I was there, I realized I'd always wanted to write, but I had kind of delayed that indefinitely, giving priority to my academic ambitions. And once I was in that creative writing workshop, writing the story that Malavika, you mentioned the other day about my mother, I realized that I could write. And then at that point, I was actually working on my PhD. And suddenly, a lot of stories started coming to me, and I was writing down sketches. I could not write my PhD and those stories simultaneously. So I told them, please wait. They were very obedient. They waited for 2 years. And then I took those sketches out of my desk drawers and started writing them one by one. By then, I had relocated to Amsterdam, and one of the best things that happened to me there was I became part of a writing group. And that really helped me, you know, because it gave me friendship, solidarity. The writing process is a very lonely one, and you need cheerleaders, you need people with you. And then after having about written 5-6 stories, I was just trying to finish off the sketches. I was just trying to give expression to what was already there without having any ulterior motive. But once I had written about 5-6 stories, I realized that there was a certain pattern to them. There were certain common things. So A, they all happen to be stories about women I know who have been important in my life. B, they were all from Kolkata, which is inevitable from the first one because I'd spent most of my life here. And three, very importantly, they are all at a crossroads. Also, what I was drawn to in their stories were failures and unfulfillments. You know, that is when after that, the other stories I wrote were written a little consciously, not to make a collection as such, but it was at that point that I became aware that these stories had a certain pattern about them. And I just want to add something here. You know, whenever we talk about women in India, I just feel that there are two extremes. On the one hand, you have huge role models, you know, who inspire, who have either extremely successful women who live their dreams or highly idealistic women who live their life for the well-being of others, who have pledged their lives for the well-being of others. On the other hand, you have stories like you have written, which is about sexual abuse, violence against women, which is a reality of our lives. And both of them get attention, and rightly so. But there is an ocean in between, you know, between these two extremes. And my stories are about this chasm, if you will, about ordinary middle-class women whose stories are never told because they're not dire enough to attract the attention of the world. So I felt very compelled to write about them.
So before I move to Rajorshi and Shakti, you mentioned that one heartbreaking story about the wasted dream. So that story goes back in time. So
that's the only story outside, like it was set in 70-71.
Yes, at the Nakshal period. So why did you think that fitted into another fairly, there were lots of common strands? It was a story about this woman who married and couldn't complete her PhD thesis, and then what happens to that incomplete thesis?
It's a story of my mother, and I just felt, you know, that has been one story that has, in a way, defined my growing up years. So it was not talked about much. At the risk of giving it away, I think I should say
you
why it is tragic.
Never give a story away, but okay.
Yes, it is that, you know, she was born into privilege, but her father, she was very young when her father died and had a very difficult life, and she, you know, basically self-educated. She educated herself with the help of scholarships, and she was very bright, and she was doing her PhD, and just then her family decided that she should get married, and only the typing of the thesis was left, and unfortunately it got destroyed accidentally during the Nakshal movement. She also gave up a career to bring us two sisters. But the thing is, you know, that story which was told to me, I think when I was in middle school or high school or whatever, my mother never referred to it as such. I didn't even know what a PhD was at that point of time. And then later, but it stayed with me. It stayed with me because it was one of those things that was always pushed into the background. It was never talked about, but I know it was a deep pain in my mother's life. And also, I think it is symbolic of, you know, the way women's sacrifices are normalized. As she was saying, if you're a mother, you know, there are certain things that go along with it. And that became a very normalized story as, you know, in our relationship. And I also felt that what she had faced in a previous generation, while I became a wife and later a mother, I felt that things haven't really changed much. You know, okay, my thesis did not get burned because there is technology on my side. And my father, my husband had actively encouraged what I was doing. But in many ways, women's lives have not changed very much. So I felt that that could be an integral part of this collection.
Okay. So finally, your story, Rajorshi. So you have women from, again, set in Calcutta, like Rituparna's book. So what made you choose these three women from three very different backgrounds and put them together? And there's this myth of Manusha, which also plays out in the book. So what made this novel come to you? It is quite different from what you'd written earlier.
Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you very much to the Literary Meet for having me as part of this fantastic platform. It's an honor to share the stage with two wonderful sounding authors and books, which I'll definitely look up. Thank you very much to Kunal. It's wonderful to see you. Kunal was very kind to launch an earlier book of mine several years ago. Shakti is, as Malavika said, Shakti is the story of, initially, it appears to be the story of three very different women from very different backgrounds in the city of Kolkata. The one thing that brings them together is that they all find that they are in possession of these absolutely magical powers that promise to realize their deepest dreams. And initially, of course, they're exhilarated, but very soon, two things happen. They realize that the powers themselves, the lure of the powers themselves have a very dark side, and the powers seem to be part of a Faustian pact, and there is a price to pay. And why they are from very different backgrounds is that, and that's kind of part of the story, why are these powers being distributed to people across a range of social backgrounds? But for me, the novelist, it was also very much the challenge that drew me in of writing about the city from these very different perspectives. Because one of the things that becomes clear as you progress into the novel is that not only, as Damyanti mentioned about a place like Delhi and everywhere else, that your experience of the city is conditioned profoundly by who you are, by, for example, your gender, but it's also, as the women in this book discover, it's also, along with that, simultaneous to that, conditioned by aspects like class. So all of these women inhabit, nominally inhabit the same city, but very soon they realize that their experiences of the same spaces are so different, and they're so unaware of other realities that are going on very close to them, happening to other people, but those people are from a very different background. And so one of the dimensions of the story is people's eyes opening to other lives around them, other realities around them. For example, the narrator, she's a middle-class school teacher, and she initially very explicitly wants to become involved in other people's lives. She wants to be useful in a way more than just being a middle and high school history teacher. So what she does is she actually anonymously writes an agony column. And through that agony column, in a very small way, she becomes involved in lives very different from her own. So that is one of the drives behind the book and behind the characters in the book, how to become aware of lives other than your own in this city we all share.
One of the stories you mentioned is inspired by a domestic help in your own family who worked with your family for many years. So can you just tell us how that part of the story came to be, and is that a bee or a fly? Okay, okay, and how you actually gave part of your advance to.
Yeah, very much. I mean, and that connects to the question Malavika asked earlier about Manusha, which I hadn't addressed. One of the characters is an adaptation of a real life model who is someone far more than our domestic help, but she initially entered our lives as our domestic help. And Shantidi, who's a family presence in a very profound way. But one of her abilities that writers would absolutely many writers would absolutely kill for, is that one of her many astonishing abilities is of an incredible degree of dream recall. Like, she has this amazing ability to recall the details of her dreams long after she has woken up several days later, and to share them. And they are invariably interesting dreams. So actually, when you read, for those of you who'll pick up the book, the scene where the Arati character has her first encounter with Manusha, this goddess, this deity that she reveres, and Manusha appears to her in a neighborhood pond. A pond very close to where Arati lives. Manusha appears. The pond magically empties out in the middle of the night, and at the bottom, a gigantic snake is lying curled up. But very soon it starts to speak to Arati, and Arati realizes she has nothing to fear because it is her deity, Manusha. And Manusha grants her 2 wishes. And this was a dream direct in all its details. It came from a dream given to me, gifted to me by Shantidi. And I could not have begun Arati's story without this springboard. And as Malavika pointed out, it was a very small, almost like the equivalent of a Guru Dakshina, but a Dakshina. I wanted to gift a portion of my advance to Shantidi for getting me started on Arati's story.
Wonderful.
So
as you can see, there are 3 very different books. One is a collection of short stories. One is a novel, which is very complex, but is also a thriller. And one is this book about these 3 disparate lives in Kolkata. So all of you have spent some time abroad. You live in New Zealand, Damyanti lives in Singapore, and you were for a decade you were in the Netherlands. So when you look at Indian cities from the outside, I'll ask that to each of you. What do you see changing? Do you see, one of you said some people live in the 20th century, some people are living in the 14th century. So what troubles you most about, the crimes that keep popping up? You have Unnao, you have Hyderabad, you have the case of Asifa. So but those are just conflagrations. Typically, when you come back to India as a woman, what strikes you about our cities? I'll start with Rituparna this time.
Okay, so I won't be able to talk about Indian cities. I can only talk about Kolkata because after returning, I haven't been to any other city or lived in any other city. One thing I find is that, my relationship to Kolkata has changed. I like it as a city a lot less. One of the reasons being, I think, I don't know, I was spoiled a little bit by living in a very beautiful city for 10 years, so I miss the beauty and there is I deplore the lack of civic sense. I also do not like the fact that, I have a small child, she's 7 now, and all I seem to do with her, the kind of socializing, is malls. I just find malls mushrooming everywhere, and cultural life and social life kind of centered around them. A bit of the old-fashioned, how do I say it, familiarity is lost. People are a little more commercialized, things are more mechanical. The good thing is for me that I've come back to my family, though I've lost my mother. So there are still some friends around, though many are still abroad. As far as women and their security are concerned, this is obviously a very big concern. And frankly speaking, I cannot recognize the India I've come back to, especially when it comes to this particular point. I grew up in Kolkata in the 80s, and safety was not an issue at all. But now I see, even I'm a middle-aged woman, and it's like if I'm returning home late, my father gets very, very, anxious, and this shouldn't happen. And what has been happening in India in the last couple of years, starting with Nirbhaya, and I don't know whether the instances have got increased, or is it that we are coming to know more. But especially in the last 2 years, you know, the frequency with which we are having it, the law has been changed, and we are becoming more aware. News channels are highlighting it more, but the basic problem remains the same. I just feel that, you know, what is basically lacking is respect for women as individuals. And I kind of, even 10 years back, I had not seen it in this kind of a measure, you know. That is what really rattles me.
What about you, Rajorshi? You live in New Zealand, so I don't think any other country compares. But when you come back, what strikes you?
I think they are two I mean, the extent to which I agree with Malavika is that they are two realities that could not be more different. You know, it's not just the flying time that makes them very different and far apart, and that's a conversation for a different occasion, but they are two realities that could not be more different. And many of the things that Rituparna spoke about are present in the book, probably in all our books, which is, you know, women uncovering their own city, and the layers of both hidden and suddenly erupting violence. So by hidden violence, I mean in the book, people discover how much violence is concealed in the pasts and in the backstories of other characters that, you know, they had seen and known all their lives and taken for granted. But for example, Arati's story contains so many strands of extraordinary violence and violation that Joya, the narrator, does not know about at all. And then, depending on being in the wrong place at the wrong time, violence can also suddenly erupt. So a city and a space that you take for granted as familiar suddenly erupts with another potential if you are there at night, or if you are there or if you're suddenly rendered vulnerable and someone's protection is taken away. So the city is revealed with all that potential and all that concealed violence very much in the book. Having said that, one other thing I want to say about Indian cities, and I'm very aware, I'm saying it from the privileged position of being male, which allows me to move around the city in a different way than if I were a woman. I will say that compared to similar cities of a similar level of diversity, a similar level of range of people sharing the same space, and most of all, a similar level of inequality. You know, Indian cities encompass astonishing levels of inequality. But compared to other cities of the same scale in which so much inequality exists, it always amazes me how much day to day, and I'm very aware that what I'm saying is contingent on who is saying it, what time of day we are talking about. All of those things are very contingent. But having said that, if I think about Indian cities compared to, say, cities like Johannesburg, Mexico City, Rio, cities that have similar levels of inequality, it amazes me how much peaceful coexistence, peaceful within inverted commas, qualified, but peaceful coexistence there is in our cities between people of very unequal backgrounds. So for example, you know, my wife is a white New Zealander, and when we wander through working class neighborhoods in Kolkata, we very clearly stand out as symbols of difference. And both in the day and in the evening, we could be wandering through these neighborhoods, back alleys where people with very different realities live, and for the most part, we feel very physically safe. And I know from personal experience in cities like Rio or Mexico City that this is not the case. So while acknowledging the extraordinary levels of inequality and aspects of unsafeness that are part of many people's daily experience, it also amazes me, given the inequality there is, how much shared coexistence we manage in this incredibly crowded, tense space.
Okay. And you two come from a very orderly and disciplined city, Singapore. So how does the inequalities, as he said, and the diversities and the chaos that, that define an Indian city, how do you see it from the outside?
Well, Singapore, I don't think we can compare because Singapore A is very small. We could fit in about 20 Singapores within Calcutta. So the area-wise, it's very small, so it's very easy to govern. Also, it's a benevolent dictatorship. I can't say this in Singapore, but I can say it here. So, also because this is a festival where
I'm not comparing, but I'm saying when you come from there, how does it strike you?
Yeah, but so I was coming to that. So the thing is, in Singapore, it is very, very regulated, but violence against women still happens there. It does not get as much reported in the media, but it does happen. And there are organizations which fight for women's rights, and there is still ground to be covered. Given that, when I come back to India, of course, there is a difference. I mean, we can feel it because the minute I land, the way people look at me is very different. So that's very obvious. But what I see is that in India, patriarchy feels very threatened right now because women are rising up in large numbers. Women are being educated. Women are stepping out of the household. They are crossing a certain, threshold, which in certain areas of the country is considered almost taboo. So of course there's pushback. So whenever I go to a hinterland, like, a smaller city like Agra or Bhubaneswar, the men are like, ye aurtein andar rehni chahiye. Like, how dare they come out of the house? We need to teach them a lesson. So in the bigger metropolis, what happens is, people from very different backgrounds come together, people from villages who really believe that women should be, seen but not heard. They come, and here there are women who not only have voices, they hold down jobs. They don't need men for practically anything, not even for having children, because there's a growing trend in India of single women getting children by themselves, nourishing those children. So, for a man who comes from, a 16th century mentality from a village where still there is a cup. It's a completely different India. If you go to a place like Haryana, it's a completely different world altogether. You cannot almost recognize it as India. The rule of law is very, very different in hinterland Bihar if you go there, or Haryana if you go there. So when these men come to places like Delhi or Chennai or Hyderabad or wherever, they come face to face with a woman they do not recognize, and they feel very threatened by. Without reason, I would say, but for them, it's a big reason. So they need to push back. I mean, if you talk to the people, the culprits in the Nirbhaya tragedy, one of the things they said was, we need to teach her a lesson. How dare she step out of the house? That's her crime. I mean, how can you step out of the house? So in India, this is a situation where we are going through a transition. I think in the last 30 years, India has changed almost beyond recognition. Earlier, you only used to see ambassador cars on the roads, You did not have like 217 television channels. Internet was unheard of. Now, you can have, for example, in outside of Lucknow, I have seen, WhatsApp videos where women have been gang raped and people are forwarding those WhatsApps. So technology has stepped into the mix. So it's a very, very different India now than it used to be, simply because it's a perfect storm of, very different levels of education that have come in for the women. And men are not being prepared, you see. Women are being told, aage badho, beti badhao, beti bachao. But what are the men being told? How are they to find the newer rules of engagement? Their role earlier used to be, you need to protect women. Now, my point is, do not respect women, ye to Devi hai and iski puja karo. But we are not teaching them how to treat them as equals, because even in schools, when I go for workshops, I teach workshops at small schools in smaller cities of India, girls and boys are sitting separately. So you're not teaching them how to interact with each other as equals, and that is what becomes a huge clash in our cities, because what happens is all of this becomes like a perfect storm, and then it all brews up, and then an explosion happens, and you see it, and it's all over the news, and it's an Unnao, it's a Hyderabad, it's a Delhi. But Delhi or Unnao or Hyderabad didn't happen in a day. It festers, 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 and there are a lot of things, factors that feed in. It's a very complex reality. And each of those factors has to be understood. So please, no shootouts of culprits, like, you just decide to shoot them. Study them, figure out what are the factors that lead to this situation. So in the bigger cities, this kind of violence against women it's not a disease, it's a symptom. And that needs to be recognized, I think.
Okay. I think this is a good time to see if we have any questions from the audience. Yes, there's a gentleman there in the blue t-shirt.
It's 2020 and India is doing advanced things like sending rockets to the moon or orbiting around Mars. But there's nothing about sex education even in the top schools till now. I passed out way back in '94 in one of the best schools in Kolkata. That time sex education is not there. But even now when I ask my friends, their children, are we having sex education in the country? No, it's not there. If we have sex education, then male students can be taught even the behavior, even like what happens when you move forward sexually towards a woman, and this can really psychologically help the male students throughout the country. What's your take on that?
So I'll put that to Damyanti because she works with such issues.
Yeah, for me, what I've found while working in a very limited fashion with non-profits in India is that I find that in the underprivileged communities specifically, it has a lot of benefits, the kind of sex education that you talk about, because at Project Y, where I volunteer, we have workshops with psychiatrists who come in and they teach you good touch, bad touch, how to talk, what to do, what is the boundaries, what are the rules of engagement. So all these things, especially in underprivileged communities, really help. It also helps sometimes that they are taught very simple things, like they all have a midday meal. So we have kind of taught them, everybody comes and cleans their own dishes. So this is the first time a boy who comes in from Haryana realizes that washing a dish is not rocket science. It's also something that a boy can do, and it kind of equalizes boys and girls very well. So yes, that kind of education, not just in the underprivileged communities, but also in schools. You're very right, because I've been to schools where I teach workshops, and there's simply a lot of segregation. So it almost feels like you're in a mosque, because the boys are seated differently, the girls are seated differently. And that is something that, we're not teaching them how to engage with each other, especially because in the work environment, there's no such segregation. So girls, for example, do not have a separate whatever of office is there, they have to work together. And both the genders, men and women, who have not interacted with each other throughout their lives of education, they do find it very difficult to interact as adults. And I agree with you that some, education of that sort is definitely needed, and I think not enough attention is being paid to it at all levels, starting from policy and down to the level of implementation in India.
Yes, there's a question up front here.
I come from a surrounding where not only the oldies, but teenagers, youth you can say, they have a certain mentality about women. Like if they meet some independent woman, they behave like they know this and they are very appreciating about it. But at home, when they are with women, they treat them like anything and they don't let their women go out and all that. So how to deal with the youth who behave like this and don't want to listen to the things happening around the world and women are empowering? How can we tell them that what you are doing is not right and what you have been taught is not right? You need to change your mind. So how can we take on that?
I think I'll put that to the only male on the panel. How do you make a man unlearn what he has learned through conditioning all his life?
I think that's a wonderful question. I think it connects to, and something Damyanti said at the very start, which is that it's not even just about the very essential dimension of, say, sex education. It's about actually like even beginning at a deeper level than that, and with the questioning what sociologists might call the microphysics of ordinary behavior and how gendered they are and all the assumptions that go into. So for example, and she spoke about this, that from a very early age to learn that there are no necessary tasks that are for boys or girls. Anyone can wash a glass. Anyone can help their mother. Or indeed the father can take that role. So it starts there. Having said that, every person that you encounter, the next young man that you encounter, you can't take on that role if that's not being played for them. We can do that at home and at school for younger generations. But I think one thing women become, correct me if I'm wrong, women become very good at is actually gauging, the particular male ego that they are interacting with, and how brittle and how secure it is, and how best to administer these necessary life lessons while grappling with that ego. And I think women are always doing that. They're always negotiating with the male egos present in the room, and to what extent they can handle being punctured, or to what extent they can handle being reformed.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that.
Sure.
One of these things, this has been asked to me, in fact, by some of my schoolmates who are, as you can imagine, are all middle-aged men now. And they asked me these questions: how do I sensitize my son, or how do I do this? So I said, one of the first things you have to do is become sensitive yourself, because you are clueless. So one of the things that men can be told as an exercise is, please go and ask the women in your lives. Ask the mothers, ask the sisters, ask the girlfriends, ask the daughters. What has their experience of men been? And ask, put them at their ease, say that, can you have this conversation? And if you're getting shut out of this conversation, that is also an answer. If your mother refuses to answer that question, if she gives you a non-answer, that also is an answer. So for men to be educated, the burden is not on the women alone, right? It is, of course, on both parents. Somehow we are told कि माँ को बच्चों के को बड़े अच्छे values अपने बेटों को सिखाओ. But it is not only the mother who has to do it, it is the father also who has to do it, because they are both parents. They both gave birth to that son. So what you need to do, to talk to guys who say, what are these problems? I have never faced these problems. Please tell them, can you please go and interview 10 women you know, and ask them the number of incidents of harassment that they have faced, what has happened to them on a street, what has happened to them in their homes. Just ask them. So come back to me with answers from 10 women, please. And if you do it with honesty, whatever answer you give me, I will accept it.
I think that's a wonderful starting point.
I think we have just a couple of minutes left, so okay, just a quick question.
The problem is, if they'll interview 10 women and come with answers, they will tell us that don't go out. They will find that
तब उस आदमी का नियत खराब है, उसको आप छोड़ दो. But if you want to answer, where basically even if they come back with answers that these women are endangered, let me just explain it to her actually, that if they come back with answers that are troubling, they'll say then you should simply not go out.
I actually, I find myself speechless when I encounter questions like that. If you will allow me the liberty, I wanted to add a different layer to the conversation that has been going on. So, for quite some time we have been talking about women who do not get the kind of privileges that others have. I just wanted to say, it's just not about, I mean, you talked about places where women are put in their places, are kept in their places. I just want to say that one of the fallacies of the modern woman is that we equate, this is not an answer to her question, is that we equate economic independence with empowerment. And it has been my experience that it is not so. Even people from privileged backgrounds who have had education offered to them on a platter, for whom having a career is not a problem, even for them, just bringing home a salary does not translate into empowerment. The main thing is whether you have the right to options in life, whether you have a right to choice, whether you have the right to, whether you want to marry or not, whom you want to marry, whether you want to have a child or not, those kinds of options. And they are not always related to money or privileged backgrounds. I think that is something I would like to draw attention to.
And if you want to answer the lady's question, then we'll call this session to a
to
close.
answer the question, I'll just quote you this girl from this book, You Beneath Your Skin, whose brother says exactly the same thing to her. Ghar ke andar raho, you should stay at home at night. And she said, well, I'm paying the same taxes as you are. Why don't you stay home? So, if I'm paying the same taxes as you're paying, you stay home, then we'll all be safe, because it is the men who are, it feels as if men cannot walk out on the streets, without apparently raping women. So all men should stay at home. There should be a curfew after 8 p.m. and women should be walking the streets, and it'll all be safe for all of us. I mean, that's a wonderful solution, don't you think?
Yes, I think that's also a perfect end to a session about she and her city. So I remember seeing this ad in a Japanese airline brochure which said, putting a woman in her place. And it was an article about all the CEOs in various companies across the world who were women. So if you give women opportunities and security and enable them to reclaim their cities, perhaps when you come back next to India, we all have to keep working towards that. And hopefully, without the benign dictatorship that you normally live under, people will slowly change and create better cities.
Nobody is going to enable us for anything.
Yes,
they are
we
not
have
going
to
to
claim
give
it.
us any opportunities. Nobody is going to empower us. Nobody is going to do us any favors. Women have to, do exactly what men have done, claim their space. And not claim a space which is higher, which is better, which is bigger. Just claim a space, which is an equal space, just like two people. If two women can claim a space as equals, two men can claim a space as equals. A man and a woman can also claim that space as equals. And thank you so much, Malavika. I mean, this has been very energizing for me, and I love this venue, and I really love this session, and thank you for the questions.
Thanks, Damyanti.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Rajorshi.
It's been
Thanks, Rituparna. The books are available at the festival bookstore just outside the East Gate. I strongly recommend all 3 books. The authors will be ready to sign as well. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Let's have another round of applause for our wonderful panelists.